I got to tell you guys about a few new products over at our favorite CBD store. That's, of course, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. The first thing I'm going to tell you about that's brand new over there is these THCV gummies. There's 10 milligrams of THCV per gummy and 10 gummies per jar. A lot of y'all are probably familiar with this THCV. Some people call it diet weed. It's very good for intermittent fasters. THCV helps suppress or dull your appetite, which, of course, a little bit unlike regular THC that, as you probably know, or at least you've heard, can give you the munchies. THCV helps promote energy, unlike regular THC, which, of course, makes you feel kind of mellow. This is legal, oh my God, legal under the Farm Bill. So thank you, Farm Bill. The second thing I want to tell you about that's new over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com is their full spectrum nano CBD soft gels. These have the perfect amount of CBD with THC. 25 milligrams of CBD and 0.27 milligrams of THC per soft gel. Their everyday formula brings your body back to homeostasis and adds this nice extra layer of chill. I like that. I think you do too. A lot of us need that now and again, or maybe every day. Nanotechnology allows better absorption into your body, even better than their other products, which was already amazing. Again, this has a calming effect and it lasts about 6 to 8 hours. And of course, like the other stuff, it's legal under what? The Farm Bill. Thank you, Farm Bill. It's legal. I would not get you guys in trouble. Go over to PalomaVerdeCBD.com. They've got a lot of great products. I talk about them all the time. The massage oil. They've got the sleep bundle. They got nano CBD soft gels, CBD bath bombs, which are amazing. Gummies, tinctures, all of that stuff. Of course, for my French bulldogs, Lux and George, the pet tinctures and the pet gummies. All of these things are over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Oh yeah, did I tell you about the cool menthol sports cream? Of course I have before. It's the best sports cream in the world. I get reviews from customers on this all the time. That's the number one thing I like from this company. And they've got all of these great things. Over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com, you will get a promo code because Carlos and Vanessa, the owners, love this show and they want to help out the listeners of this show. Promo code BUCK at checkout gets you 20% off of your order over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Promo code BUCK at checkout gets you 20% off of your order. Go give them business and in turn, give me business. Now, let's get back to the show.
You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, but I call the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the Counterflow Podcast. Great to have you riding here with us once again this week. And I'm so happy to finally bring to you guys Mr. Auron MacIntyre. He's someone that I've wanted to have on for quite some time. Shout out and a thank you to my friend Pete Quinones for making this happen. Oren is someone that I've followed for a long time. His Twitter, his YouTube, his Substack, all of it. Excellent content. And if you guys don't subscribe to any of that, I think you will probably by the time we're done with this interview. We're going to be talking about the total state. And I know a lot of libertarians listen to this show for a long time, and I understand that there's some nuance now that a lot of libertarians get. But for a long time, we in the libertarian movement would just talk about the state, right? And then that's different because the state is the single authority on force, right? The monopoly on violence, as they say. But we would say, well, corporations, they're private, so that's different. The lines have not just been blurred recently, they've probably been blurred for quite some time between the state and corporations. But I certainly think our 2020 vision has helped us understand this a lot better. And to talk about this topic, and we're going to dive into it and then kind of hit some of the ancillary parts in and around this topic. Like I said, Auron MacIntyre is finally here on the show. Auron, welcome, sir. How are you?
Doing well, man. Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm very happy to get you on. I'm a fan of your work, and I follow your Substack, your YouTube, and of course at the end here we'll plug all of that stuff. I guess all of my listeners should know who you are, but just in case in case there's not, maybe there's some boomer cons out there that need to know who you are. Give a quick intro. Anything you'd like them to know is fine.
Sure. Yeah, I'm just someone who has been kind of documenting what I've been learning about politics here. I started as kind of one of your standard issue GOP conservatives, talk radio conservatives. Worked a little bit in politics, and I was a political journalist for a little while, just local stuff, nothing big. But kind of as I went along, like a lot of people, I found that politics just didn't work the way I thought it did. Started kind of looking at different thinkers kind of outside of my normal wheelhouse, people I hadn't heard of before. And as I was going on, I started making videos about it and writing about it, that kind of thing. And so that's how I ended up with the YouTube channel and the Substack and everything.
Was there a moment in time or something that happened or someone you read? How did you kind of stumble into realizing, wait a second, things aren't, maybe things don't work as I was told that they're supposed to work? What was kind of the red pilling moment, as they might say?
Well, like a lot of people, the 2016 election was a big kind of starting point for me. I wouldn't say I was completely there yet, but it made me start asking questions. What was going on with Trump, the reaction, everything about it, institutions and things just weren't behaving the way they're supposed to. And then I would say that the COVID lockdowns were really probably my big wake up call. Like I said, I was your talk radio GOP conservative. I was like, well, when tyranny comes, I've got the Constitution, I've got my Bill of Rights. There's nothing that the government can do, in those scenarios. And then just watching each one of those things fall, as everything was shut down and everyone just complied and none of my rights were protected. Everyone who I thought was on my side seemed to have some kind of rationale as why it was necessary to trade away all these things. And that's when I kind of went back to all these political thinkers that I had heard about, like this guy Curtis Yarvin and that kind of thing. I was like, okay, I would need to give these guys a second try and really take a look. And I think that's kind of where I got started. That's about the time I started the channel. So
okay, well, man, it's grown quickly, fast. Then that's really nice. I come from the libertarian world, and a lot of us in that world had maybe a similar wake up moment where we had been those who say, if people just hear this message of liberty and freedom, if they can just hear, let's say, Ron Paul speak, well, everyone else is going to be just like we are, and they'll understand we should abolish the Fed, we should bring all the troops home, and liberty should be what we all strive for. And then, like you said, I call it getting 2020 vision now at this point, but yeah. I'm looking around and people that were kind of nice to me, even in my social sphere, in real life, you're the quirky libertarian guy, but they would pay lip service to it. They were a lot of people on social media, not in real life because they wouldn't see you in real life, saying if people leave their house, I support drones flying over. At the time I was in Austin, the city of Austin, and letting police know to arrest these people on the spot. And for free, of course, these people would report you for free and they would work for free as arms of the state, when just a few years prior, it was like, hey, I kind of agree with libertarians on some stuff. So it was that kind of weird moment where like, wait a second, maybe a lot of people don't want this freedom thing at all. And I guess that's basically kind of what you saw the same thing and maybe in your own way.
Yeah, especially that aspect of the marketplace of ideas, like you're talking about. If I can just expose people to the truth, then the truth will win out. The best ideas will compete and they'll be victorious. And then everyone will embrace this. Once they hear the message and they understand it, once the correct argument is made, they'll get it, right? It'll all click. And so, that's how we solve these problems. That's how these things come to resolution, but you quickly realize that that's not the case, right? That all these arguments that, especially like you're talking about, those libertarian arguments that people had mouthed when there was no real pressure, when there's no real consequence, suddenly those just fade away. There's always some reason to equivocate. There's always some reason to bend the knee at the end of the day. And so you realize that there's a lot more to our political decision-making process than just this free-flowing exchange of ideas. There's much more that compels people to back different political ideas and express them and take action. And that's a big part of kind of the journey that I was on. Let's
talk about something that you write about or have been recently and speaking about and you call it the total state. And I think it's something that a lot of people on the right still need to hear. I think people on the left, personally, I think they're not going to be extremely sympathetic to something like this. If they are, more power to them. That would give me cause for optimism. But can you kind of give my listeners the definition of what you call the total state, and then we'll get into it from there?
Sure. So I think most people would recognize the idea of a total state from historical examples, something like Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia, something that's very obvious, right? There's this large apparatus that is with the purpose, the express purpose of centralizing control and thought, right? There's usually even a explicit office with the job of dictating like what goes into magazines and TV shows and all this stuff. It's a centralized top-down attempt to unify culture and everything else under the auspices of the state. And we can see that both in something like fascism and communism. And so I think a lot of people will have a concept of the total state, but what they don't understand is that they are also in a scenario that is approaching a total state. They don't see it in kind of Western liberal democracy because we don't have those formal institutions, that formal structure of top-down power. But somehow all of our major institutions always seem to agree with each other, right? They always seem to work together. This is a concept that many people will be familiar with if they're familiar with Curtis Yarvin. This is the cathedral, right? This decentralized consensus that occurs between our major institutions. But we're also moving beyond that because the more our society relies on these mass bureaucracies and this high level of integration, we end up in a scenario where every aspect of our lives falls under the control of these mass organizations and institutions. And so that means that every single interaction we have, whether it's something casual with our entertainment, to our employment, to our marriage, to whatever it is, everything is falling under the purview of these organizations that all are linked in kind of this association. And so we are ourselves, even though we don't have this formal communism or fascism, we are ourselves falling into our own version of the total state now in the West.
Yeah, and that's something I learned from Curtis Yarvin that you just spoke of is the formal versus informal. I think that was Yarvin. Mm-hmm. It's almost better to have the formal because not necessarily in defense of the USSR or certainly Nazi Germany, but the formal allows you to at least understand what the rules are, right? And we've got this informal version of it where we think we know what the rules are because we're told this since we were young. But then if you take the, let's say, democracy blinders off or remove the they live glasses, or put them on, I should say, it's not what they're telling us. And it's like the informal kind of dumbs everyone down and gives us the security like, no, they say this is a democracy, we'll be good. So I don't know, it gets lost in that kind of language, and I think that's by design, but that's possibly another story. One of the things some people on the right that I personally know, and even I guess we could say right libertarian circles, I have heard from more than one person, we got corporations wrong. We were wrong on this whole idea of corporations being good, being a positive thing. There's some kind of Ayn Randian messaging in there as well with that. How were the right wrong on corporations?
Well, because it used this idea of the public-private distinction against us, right? We have this idea in kind of the Western liberal democracy that if something is under the formal definition of the state, right, that's where the danger lies. That's where you need protections. That's where you need your constitutional amendments and separation of powers to restrain that. And that makes a good deal of sense, right? They're the guys with the guns. They're the guys with the monopoly on force. So, of course, that's where the real threat of totalitarianism lies. And so this was especially, like you said, this worked very well kind of on conservative and libertarians, because they said, well, we don't like big government, but we think people should be free to spend their money and have all these advances and make businesses as big as they want to. So a corporation at the end of the day is just a big business. So aren't these things great? Aren't these really good because they're in the private sector? But what we didn't understand, I think, is that there's no such thing as a truly free market. There's no such thing as a true separation between the public and the private domains, the government and the private business. And because all nations now are these mass who understand that one of their primary goals is to leverage the power of the state against the market, right? They're all using the forces of the government to basically push out all competition and to create these monopolies or duopolies, just these very small, closely held, non-competitive scenarios in every single market. And so what they're doing is they're at one point, they're using the public-private distinction to avoid certain regulations and certain scrutinies. But then when no one's looking, they're over there supporting all the regulations and all the leverage they can from the government to destroy their enemies. And I think that a lot of conservatives and libertarians kind of closed their eye to that aspect of business, or said, "Oh, that's just bad actors, and if the government wasn't there, then they couldn't do that." Right? This is unfortunately always the libertarian answer. Well, if the if the state just didn't exist, then the state couldn't be leveraged against your enemies. Mm-hmm. But of course, the state always exists, right? And as angering as that's going to be for some libertarians, that is a fact of life. That's like saying, "What if humans didn't sin?" Right? It's like, well, that's what makes you human, right? And unfortunately, as much as people hate that, the state is part of reality. And so when you close your eyes to that reality, you can make all kinds of dangerous assumptions that allow for abuses like the corporations have done.
Mm-hmm. I love that you said there's no free market, because for the most part, when we're in, especially with corporations, what we're discussing and regulations, there is not. And it's funny, I still hear people on the left kind of go after corporations, and they just want no regulations, and they just want to do what they want and poison the water. I don't hear this as much post 2020. Naturally, they seem to be a bit more in love with certain corporations, which I want to get into here in a second as well. But do you ever look into or have opinions on how much the Federal Reserve existing contributes to degeneracy and so much of the cultural rot that we see?
Again, I know there are people who have way more background on the Federal Reserve, and I'm not going to play an economics expert today on the podcast, because I know on a libertarian audience, there are going to be people who are much more well-versed. But it is certainly true that a large number of our government institutions and the things that our government institutions enable in financial markets do lead to that stuff, right? Because they allow for lifestyles that drive out that drive out things like incentivizing family creation, right? That they ensure that people have to invest in things outside that it creates inflated markets and higher rates or the higher prices for things like homes and stuff like that make it very difficult for people to have a family, and they have to, people have to work two jobs to just make ends meet, or have both spouses working rather than be able to have a traditional setup where there's a caretaker and that kind of thing. So there are, and that's another big problem for the conservative end as well, right? They want to talk about the value of family values and that kind of thing out of one side of their mouth, but then they also want to talk about the wonders of the free market and free enterprise and everything, not realizing that many of the things that they were backing on the financial side, the economic side, were the very things that were making it impossible for the family values that they pretended they supported to really flourish.
I want to get you to talk about the distinction between, let's say, these mega conglomerate corporations. I don't want to even name some of them because I'll get dinged on this channel, but we know the ones I'm talking about. And then the small business, the entrepreneur at a small local level. We saw over the last couple of years that certainly the powers that be make a giant distinction between the two. I don't want people listening to think, well, these guys must think that even small businesses. Those are kind of like small corporations. They must be bad. Can you make that distinction?
Yeah, that's really important because be very clear. Like, I'm not a communist. Like,
Right.
Karl Marx is evil. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm with you guys on all of that stuff. But yeah, I think the big problem is that we were convinced that that this is all one thing, that business is just all one thing, right? So you either support business or you don't, which is, of course, ridiculous, right? That's not how any of this works. And we can see that activity inside, like you said, the COVID example is a really good one, right? So there have been many ways in which the government has been favoring large corporations for a long time. I'm sure that your audience in general is familiar with regulatory. I suddenly lost the term in my brain.
Capture.
Yes, thank you. Regulatory capture.
Yes.
I'm sure your audience is very familiar with this idea that large corporations actually support a lot of regulations because they can comply with them and small businesses can't. And so that means that they are allowed to push competitors out of the marketplace by actually encouraging the growth of government and encouraging government intervention, that kind of thing. And we see this on full display in COVID, right? Where we've had a situation where there's this emergency, the government declares it, everything's got to be locked down. People can't even go to the beach because it's just too dangerous. But guess what's open? Walmart, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not your mom and pop store, not your small business, none of that. Not the one that probably could only hold like 10 people anyway, and people could just come in one at a time. No, the only places that are able to operate are giant big box retailers. And the government's rationale for this is things like, well, this is the only place that most people can buy certain products anyway, like the things they need, groceries and whatever. Nothing else exists in this area. Well, why doesn't it exist in this area? Oh, because we've been passing favorable legislation and regulation to ensure that no one could compete with Walmart for the last, however many decades. So we pushed all the possible replacements for this. So we have to keep it open because the very government policies we created made this the only option. And so it's too big to fail, right? But also the fact that Walmart is big enough and it has the money to comply with these regulations for COVID that we're going to push down on it, so it can have employees out there limiting the number of people walking in. It can enforce the spacing or whatever. There's all these rationales as to why big business can continue to operate and small businesses can't. And so we see this massive intervention of the government that literally shutters the competition to everyone but its most favored corporations and donors and supporters who have been in bed with them for many decades to strangle these small entrepreneurs and are now looking for that final push to finish them off, which a lot of people with small businesses know, COVID was the death knell for a lot of people who were still hanging on and competing with those major corporations.
Yeah, it makes me wonder. It almost was the final death knell. It makes me wonder how long before they try something like this again, just to kind of totally wipe out the people they prefer to wipe out. It's almost any business without an HR department is the enemy. It seems, because
very much.
I've heard over years, and I'm really hearing it and seeing it a lot more. Luckily, the people are realizing this. Human resource departments are just, to put it nicely, some of the worst groups of people in America. Can you talk about the damage HR does? Well, I'll let you answer this.
Yeah, they're commissars. They're political commissars of the state. That's what they are. And they're required of any corporation of a certain size, which only increases the incentive to push people out of these. So one of the guys I've been really working with recently, been reading through and writing a lot on, is Samuel Francis. Yeah. And he has this book, Leviathan and His Enemies. And in that book, he explains that the small business is part of a culture that is the enemy of kind of these large managerial bureaucracies, because it allows for autonomy, individuality. It allows for regionalism. It allows for separate cultures and separate standards, because that small business can be small and nimble, and it can serve a niche market, a particular market. It's not made like these giant corporations to serve everyone, and it's not made to deliver all that stuff. Well, that means that it needs to be crushed, because if those small businesses continue, then people can hide from kind of the total state. They can hide from this mass indoctrination and this mass compulsion that's pushed through these what are so supposed to be private corporations. But of course, we know they're not really private corporations. They're entirely in bed with the government at every level, especially at the HR level. And so they want to crush them for many reasons. But one of the big reasons is that those small businesses can protect people with politically dissonant ideas and culturally dissonant ideas. Those people are beyond the reach of the HR departments. They can't be forced to comply with the newest NPC update, right? Because they don't have those political commissars sitting in their corporation threatening them every moment. If they say the wrong thing, they think the wrong thing, they wear the wrong thing, they watch the wrong thing in the office, they're totally going to be toast, right? And so those small businesses have to go because because if they exist, then there's places people can hide. There's a place to go. There's another way to live life outside of this mass compulsion through what is supposed to be a private corporation. But those HR departments are there to make sure that anyone working for these large bureaucratic organizations continually complies with whatever cultural dictates are being pushed down the pipeline.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you were saying this, I like I said, I was in Austin and I moved to a small town called Lockhart, about 30 minutes southeast. And there's a lot of small local businesses here, which is wonderful. But even over the last year, it's interesting, you'll see some of the same symbolism stickers, especially during the month of June, on the small businesses. It's almost like there's the joke about, well, these people have the BLM sign in their front yard so their house doesn't get broken into. And so I almost wonder if it's this weird signal like, don't come after us, big corporations, we're on the friendly side. I can't figure that part out. It'd be a sociological study for sure. But yeah, it's interesting. Or almost like, don't think we're some small Texas rednecks. Look, we're hip too. We've got these stickers with the rainbow. It's odd. I want to get you to talk just a little bit more. I think that point about the homogenization of tastes and cultural preferences, we see it everywhere now. Every corporation, especially like I said, during the month of June, in our face with all of these things. And they're trying to, it always seems like they're trying to make everyone this giant homogenous blob of really no taste, but, of taste. TikTok does it. All of these, just this kind of mishmash of garbage pop culture. And it seems like there's got to be something driving this that's controlling a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, it's the natural inclination of power. Power always wants to centralize, right? Power always wants to bring more under its own domain. How does it do that? It does it by taking away power from the subsidiary and bringing it under its own control. So one of the failures of both conservatives and libertarians was this idea that the individual is what actually defends freedom. But that's actually the exact opposite of the case, right? So what creates diversity, and in this case, I mean real diversity, right? Like the actual differences between cultures and individual ability of regions to act and think and do things differently from what the centralized state wants. What actually creates that is these intermediate organizations that bind us together under their protection and under their requirements. Things like family, things like a church, things like civic organizations, guilds, unions, all these things that required our loyalty and our money and our time and were made part of our identity. They competed with control of the culture, or they competed for control of the culture with the state. But as those things break down and we seek individualism, what we really end up doing is leaving ourselves without any defenses. Yeah. We get rid of all those things that used to stop the state from expanding into every region of our lives. And instead, we make ourselves this completely atomized person who can just be absorbed into kind of this Borg, right? This blob, this ever-expanding total state, because we've got rid of everything that could actually compete with it. What we want to believe is that freeing ourselves from all of these bonds makes us our own individual person. But of course, that's not how humans work. We're defined by our social interactions. We're defined by the organizations and the institutions and the beliefs that make us who we are. And those things are always at some level corporate. We are communal creatures. And man is a political animal by its very nature. And there's just no way to avoid that. And so because we have allowed our culture to kind of completely degrade, we've let families fall apart. No one goes to church anymore. No one's part of bowling leagues or the Rotary Club or any of these things that used to bind us together into communities that the state would have to negotiate with rather than just roll over and completely dominate. We have opened ourselves up to this homogenization, which gives us all the same tastes, all the same culture, all the same preferences. And that is what a mass state needs to control a mass amount of people. It's really hard to control a bunch of different people with a bunch of different preferences, a bunch of different regional understandings of morality and how they want their kids to be taught, when to live and operate. Much if unify every goo, this mass, and then just produce one thing for everyone.
Guys, I'm going to tell you about not only a sponsor for this show, but in some kind of roundabout way, maybe you could even say they're helping me run for city council right here in Lockhart, Texas. Have you guys heard about that? I know a lot of you have because you've reached out to me. I am running for city council. The position is city council at large. Here in Lockhart, Texas, the election is this November. Yes, Buck Johnson, your humble host and narrator, is running for city council at large here in Lockhart, Texas. So the Mises Mayor's PAC is more than willing to contribute to this run, and you are more than willing to contribute to the Mises Mayor's PAC. You can find them over at misesgop.org/buck. And when I say Mises, that's misesgop.org/buck. You can contribute to them on a regular basis, a one-time basis, I don't know, a 20-time basis. Whatever you want to do, you can contribute to these guys, and they are helping me fund a portion of this run for city council. It's not cheap. It's not like it's going to cost millions like a presidential run, but it's certainly not cheap, and I'm doing this to actually win this position. I would like to bring Hans Hermann Hoppe's What Must Be Done. I think that's a valuable tactic in gaining power locally and promoting liberty locally. And those are things that I am trying to do here in my town of Lockhart, Texas. So if you're interested in helping me out and helping out a sponsor of this show, you can do so at misesgop.org/buck. Once again, misesgop.org/buck. I'd appreciate all of the help. And let's see where this thing goes in November. I'll give it a shot. Thank you, guys. Let's get back to the show. Yeah, one of the things I've talked about in the last several months is the inversions that I see everywhere. It's not only the things that they present to us are not only not true, they're the opposite of the truth. And you see it everywhere now. And it seems like, to your point, there's this weird inversion where due to like obligations and responsibilities that people used to have or feel, they were taken over by the state. And so there's this, certainly there was a strain in left libertarianism, but I think a strain through society where you think, well, look, I don't have to do these. I don't feel bogged down by my family or the church or institutions that I had some loyalty to. The state does all of these things for me, and the state takes care of these things. I'm more free now. Yet you're not, because you're opening yourself up without a lot of times you don't realize it, to being kind of controlled now by this massive total state that we're talking about. Yes?
Yeah, that's the trick that happened, right? We look at our society and we say, okay, people, the state is bigger than it's ever been before. But people are under the impression that they're far more free than they've ever been before. So what happened, right? Well, what was the trick here? And the trick was that people had a large amount of their time and loyalty and money and everything else wrapped up in these communal bonds, these intermediate organizations that we were talking about. And as the state has freed them from one of these after another, they feel more free because they don't have to commit as much time and money and resources. They have more individual freedom, they feel like, because they're no longer committed to those things. But every time the state steps in to free you to those things, it's of course taking more and more dominion, more and more power. It monopolizes more and more of those things to the point where now most people can't even imagine like educating their own children or caring for their own ailing relatives or any of the things that used to be just a normal part of life just not that long ago, right? The things that had always been part of being a human being, these duties that you always had as part of communities and families and those things. All of a sudden, people can't even imagine a world where they go back to that kind of stuff. And that grows the power of the state because at each step, that means you're handing control of those different domains of life over to the state, thinking you've gotten away with something. You have a deal on your hands. But actually, all you've done is delayed the payment you're going to make to these people when they decide to say, lock you inside your home.
Yeah, well put. And speaking of homes, there's been a war on home ownership, I would say. And I think this certainly came to light when the World Economic Forum, when a lot of their material became more popular online, being passed around. Sometimes I wonder if they have so much power, why are they allowing their stuff to get out? I don't know. That's a totally different discussion, but it does seem we're seeing some of their goals achieved. And so there is that. Talk about the war on home ownership and kind of these companies like, I think it's BlackRock and things like that. Here in Texas, the home buyer market up until about 2 months ago was red hot. But I would talk to real estate agents and they'd say, yeah, it's the weirdest thing. There are all these like companies with these, they just changed their name. They put out these like kind of like storefront companies to buy all these neighborhoods. But I have a feeling it's going back to a giant corporation. And we're, the guys and girls are making a lot of money off of it that are real estate agents. So they'd be like, well, yeah, they wanted to buy this whole neighborhood and from me, So talk about that war on home ownership and how this is being accomplished, unfortunately.
Sure. So just like the destruction of the small business owner, the entrepreneur, the home is also a problem for the total state, for this like large managerial regime, because it provides a degree of autonomy, right? If you own your own home, there's certain things you can't be forced into, right? You have a certain level of security. You can live in different ways. You can choose different lifestyles. You may not be as reliant on your wage job because you actually own your place of residence instead of constantly making payments every month. You can't be forced into complying with whatever new fad is being pushed down on renters and that kind of thing. So just like the small business, the state is a barrier, or the home ownership is a barrier to the total state. It's generally a war on hard property, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea, what made the American middle class was the independence that entrepreneurship and hard property like home ownership, car ownership, all this stuff gave them, right? It gave them this autonomy to where they didn't have to be reliant on the state. They didn't have to be reliant. They could instead invest more in their community and their local cultures and those kind of things. They didn't need to be dependent at every step on the people who employed them and the state in general. But what we've seen is a redefinition of the middle class, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, home ownership is increasingly way beyond the ability of the average middle class person. Now, even car ownership. Look at inflation. Look at the attempts. Gasoline prices were specifically going out of their way not to drill for more oil so that gas prices go up. The government is happy to announce that that's the plan, right?
Yeah,
we were doing this on purpose to make sure that only people who can buy $50,000 electric cars are able to afford that level of autonomy. So the middle class is now more about your ability to, have more subscription services and get DoorDash and sign up for more things than it is for you to secure things that make you independent, right? And so the war on home ownership is just one aspect of this, but is a particularly malicious one because, as you say, there are these private equity organizations that go out and they use these shell corporations, they use these different buyers, and they go out specifically on purpose to shut starter homes completely out of the market, to make sure that those all become rental properties. They all become managed under large property. Or you'll notice that renters don't even actually operate their properties anymore, right? Like you see fewer and fewer individual people act as landlords. Instead, they are always contracting out these other corporations and putting the management of their real estate under them, and they let them handle everything until it just makes more sense to sell to that corporation than it does to continue to own it yourself. So even landlords are being centralized under these different organizations. And so we really see a war on hard property. And like you said, even these large NGOs, these globalist NGOs are willing to say, what's our plan for the future? You'll own nothing. You'll be happy. That's the plan. We're announcing it to you.
Yeah, and there's this level of comfort that they play on because a lot of us as Americans are spoiled compared to generations prior to us. There's this level of comfort that they play on, and it's, again, all of the streaming things. People, like I mentioned, there's plenty of people that loved the lockdown that just thought, well, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to see people. I don't like people. I hate interacting with people. I can work from home. I can watch all the streaming services. I don't own movies. I don't own records or CDs or tapes. Music is streaming now. Come to think of it, I don't own anything. But the problem with that is there's a lot of people in my state that are worried that Beto O'Rourke will come for their guns. I'm not sure they have to come for your guns. They can shut you off electronically if they think you have a dissident voice, or certainly if you work for one of these corporations from home and they somehow investigate your phone or your email. And, oh, look what websites you visit. You listen to Buck Johnson and Auron MacIntyre. We can shut you off. Then what are you going to do? Your gun? Why would they want to face a bloody war coming to house in Texas when they can shut you off electronically?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, look at what happened with the Canadian trucker protests, right? We have
Exactly.
these Canadian truckers, and they're probably like the best example of like critical small business, independent guys who can have a significant impact on the government, right? They own their own rigs. They have an essential job that the country needs to run, but they can't really control these people directly because they have this level of autonomy with kind of their entrepreneurship and everything. But when they do this protest and they shut down and they have this brilliant idea and it really works well for a little while to like compel the government to listen to them, how does that end? Does it end with the Canadian government like a bunch of Mounties running in and on
Right.
Horses with AK-47s, arresting people, or running in with truncheons and beating everyone? No, that's not what happens, right? What happens is they shut down their bank accounts. Right.
Yeah.
They use those centralized institutions of control, to that soft power, to punish the people to the point where they'll leave. And they don't just shut down their bank accounts. They shut down the bank accounts of anyone who might donate to them, even their families, even who had nothing to do with it, no connection to them. They just shut it down. And all of a sudden, these people are financially, they can't do anything, right? They don't have the mark of the beast. They can't buy or sell, right? And so we see that, the centralization allows them to express this soft power in a way that doesn't feel as totalitarian, because no one's bloody, no skulls are cracked, no one had to run in. But in the same way, it's almost far more sinister, because at least if someone had been physically assaulted, as terrible as it is to say, people would have felt something. There would have been this is tyranny. This is the Boston Massacre. There's something visceral about that makes people react. But when it's this slow boiling of the frog at every moment, it makes it a lot easier to take people over.
Yeah, it's this comfort that they allow people to have, and I think again it's the informal versus the formal. The formal, like you mentioned, guards on horses with guns and was trampling through people and literally grabbing them and taking them to a gulag, but informal power that no one really sees except the person harmed by it. Just shut your bank account off. You're done. What are you going to do? And again, you sometimes even get people that I would normally have agreed with on things. Well, I got to admit, it's PayPal's a private bank, or kind of defending those kind of things to their own detriment. It's still crazy. The point where we are right now with this total state, obviously where we started, where a lot of conservatives, boomer cons that I tease a lot, they kind of look back in time to 1776 and even like the Enlightenment, early American liberalism and things like this. That's what we need to get back to. Do you think the spot where we're at right now with this total state is a natural way that you're going to end up, even when you start with how we started in this country of the United States of America? Did something go seriously wrong somewhere? Because there will be some conservatives that are saying, no, had it not been for FDR and LBJ and let's say Woodrow Wilson, we would not be here right now. Is it just the natural endpoint to where we start from where we started?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a very difficult one because while I think there are a lot of problems with liberalism, and by this I mean classical liberalism, not Democrats, progressives. Well, I think there are a lot of problems with liberalism, and I think that there is a fundamental flaws in that system. You can't lay everything at its feet because we live in a different world. We have things that allow the government to centralize, and we have this managerialism that allows power to centralize in a way that it simply could not 100, 200 years ago. And that's why, the founders thought that many of the things they were putting in place would last, and it made sense at the time, right? And there's also the factor that no system lasts forever. Right. No, the one thing we want to get away from, this is a huge failure of both conservatives and libertarians, is they thought that once you could engineer the perfect government, the perfect checks and balances, or just get rid of the state, whatever the solution is there, right? Once we set this perfect thing in place, this certain level of protections, then we can just let the system run in perpetuity because our freedoms will be protected.
Right.
We've mastered, kind of the human machine, and now we can just, live in freedom and never have to worry about it again because we've kind of done this. But that's not how it works, right? Mm-hmm. If you want a civilization that values its liberty, that values its regional autonomy, you need to understand why and where it came from and what that is. We had many generations of conservatives and libertarians that were just lied to about what freedom was. Freedom is not being left alone to do whatever you want.
Yes.
That is not what anyone would have said liberty was.
Right.
Even just over 100 years ago. But we have this idea now. And we need a more holistic understanding of what the good is and what we want. That's what we've really lost. The institutions of our country have failed, and the systems that we thought would keep failure at bay haven't done so. But that's largely a failure of us to upkeep the quality and the character of our people and defend our values and our culture as much as it is a failure of those actual mechanisms. And while I think there are many failures of the mechanisms that would have to be addressed, I don't think that we can just say, well, it was, the Constitution was just a disaster from the beginning, and we were always going to end up here. Because remember, there are a lot of things that we undermine, specifically like, direct election of senators. Like, we weren't supposed to be a democracy. We were never supposed to be a democracy. We were never supposed to have this level of like, and be completely have our government completely legitimated by this mechanism, but that's how we see it now, and we see it to the level where even most people on the right see it that way, right? Mm-hmm. These are assumptions founding fathers will read. They are now saying we now call the right in much of America and the larger West.
I want to ask you about, you kind of hit on something right there that I want to extrapolate from. Lessons the right really needs to learn, maybe even in modern terms, not at large basically, or like historically or philosophically, but I can touch upon two that just popped in my head. That when the Ukraine and Russia thing went down, I saw some people that I thought were red-pilled on the right all of a sudden jump to the defense of Ukraine. We need to go assassinate Putin. He's crazy, without seeing. It's like they didn't learn a lesson or something like that. I think because of voices now like Tucker Carlson, they've figured out some things that maybe they just didn't figure out at first and had this reaction. Well, Ukraine's a free country, blah, blah, blah. Another one would be, gosh, and now I lost my train of thought on what the other one would be. But, oh yeah, this FBI thing. Mm-hmm. I have seen even people that I thought for sure were red-pilled saying now, if we can just reform the FBI.
Yeah.
It drives me crazy. Maybe because I've been one to say abolish the FBI for 20 years now. So at the moment where I think that's a welcome message to people on the right, and then they say it should be reformed, I cannot believe that you don't see this. But you can speak on those two lessons if you want, or just give me your lessons that you'd love the right to learn from just the stuff we've seen in the last 10 years, 5 years even.
Yeah, I just did a thread on this today, and I think it's really essential. The right has to change its stance, right? Libertarians, there's a lot of faults with them, but I'll give them this. At least they saw themselves as outside the system, right? They did not see themselves as kind of defenders of the status quo. Conservatives inherently do, right? It's in the name. It's what they do. And God bless them. That's their disposition. And there should. If you have a good society, you need those people, right? But their very virtue is being turned against them right now, because what they want to do is they want to say, we are the defenders of tradition. We are the defenders of our institutions and our values and those things. But what they don't realize, because it's very painful to admit, is they lost. They lost, and it's gone. This is no longer their culture. Those are no longer their institutions. And that's a really difficult thing to admit, because then you have to say, we failed. We were the torchbearers. We were the keepers. We were the defenders, and we let the system undermine us because we lost. We took our eye off the ball. We thought we were defending one thing when we should have been defending another. And instead of defending families and culture and religion and the things that made us who we are, instead we defended large corporations and a military-industrial complex. And instead of understanding those organizations are only valuable when they're defending your values, when they're defending your family, when they're defending the things that they are not themselves the good. They're only good when they're in the service of the people they're supposed to be defending and the people they're actually supposed to be working for. And so it's very hard, because many conservatives still have this knee-jerk reaction of like, well, we got to go out there and defend freedom around the world, or we have, back the blue no matter what. But if these organizations have fundamentally turned against you, and how can you look at the FBI threatening parents who are trying to defend their children from dangerous and let's just be honest, violent gender ideology? That's how conservatives need to see this stuff. It is violence against their children. When we see the FBI going after parents like this, how can you not understand that this organization is fundamentally undermined, right? And it's funny, because while a lot of my mainstream conservative friends who are still kind of in that area at the beginning of the Ukraine thing saw it that way, they had that initial like, well, but it's Russia and these are our eternal enemies and we have to battle them and everything. Right. But, at this point, they're against it. Like they really have come around. I have very few people in my life who have that viewpoint who still back this stuff, because as things went on, they realized what this was really about. That Russia was just a proxy for them. It was just a stand-in, right? Yes. That this imperialism, this imperialism is not about spreading your values or protecting freedom. Everyone over there is a bad guy. There are no good actors in that conflict, and they're just there to funnel your money to their pals. It has nothing to do with protecting innocent people, even though there's terrible things happening to innocent people over there. And there are valiant Ukrainians defending their homeland simply because they are defending their homeland. But that doesn't mean that their government or the Russian government is you don't have to pick a side. This isn't your country. It isn't your fight. And that's something that I think is very hard for conservatives who have been told that their values are ones of military expansion, right? That we have to fight every battle across the world in the name of freedom and democracy. But you don't even have that at home. So who are you kidding, right? Do you think Joe Biden, is fighting for freedom over there while asking major corporations to censor you and make sure you get fired at home? No, he doesn't care about that at all. And it's becoming more and more obvious to those people, I think.
That's good, because it's the same instincts that the progressives have with, and a lot of neocons were progressives, the Trotskyites. But this idea, it's puritanical in nature. We need to shove our ideas down everyone else's throat. America was doing that across the globe most of my life. Progressives have been doing it at home. And I hope people on the right are waking up going, man, that stuff I used to think about spreading the message or spreading democracy, that's what progressives are doing to us. It's going through every institution in our country, not necessarily other countries. But how is there a thread of optimism that we can cling on to? Do you think, I don't know, decentralization is possible? Do you see a national divorce coming? I do see even non-Tucker Fox voices saying the term national divorce now, which is nice. What DeSantis is doing is kind of a soft nullification, a soft version of secession almost. Is there any optimism in your mind in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I get a lot of backlash on this. I'm kind of famous for my black pills here, but it's all in, I think, your perspective, right? So the bad news is that the world that you thought of as permanent is going away. And that's just true, right? It's just fundamentally not going to be there. The American empire, for better or for worse, is coming apart. And that's really hard to hear. That's a terrible thing to hear, right? As someone who loves my homeland and loves my country and has a lot of pride in that, right? That's a very difficult thing to understand. But at the same time, as I look around at all these institutions and the way they've been hijacked and the way they've been turned on the people I love and care about, like, are these things worth defending anymore? Like these things that are pushing this kind of garbage on children, the thing that are victimizing them in this way, a system that is dead set on making it impossible for people to have faith and family. Is that really the kind of thing that I hope just continues forever? No. Like, would I like for these things to be reformable? Yes, I wish that was the case, but I think it's pretty self-evident at the point that we're beyond that. So the bad news is that stuff is going to come apart and it's going to be rough years while it happens, right? There's no getting around that, right? The entire world is built on the idea that America is just going to continue in perpetuity. That's just the way it is. And it's and tough times ahead when it doesn't happen, right? We're already seeing this with supply chain issues and everything else, right? At the same time, the good news for me, the thing that gives me hope and the thing that I think everyone should be hopeful for is that creates opportunity, right? We don't have to be locked into this idea that we're always just defending this failing, crumbling edifice. Instead, we can look forward to the opportunity to grow communities that benefit our families and our faith and our prosperity. We can look for that stuff going forward, and that means in a lot of ways the stuff you're talking about with like DeSantis, right? You can build these networks because the federal government is just losing its competence. They don't have the ability to kind of deliver on their promises anymore. The states that are able to build their own networks, that are able to build their own power bases, that are able to close themselves off from this just poison that is spilling out of DC, those people are the ones that are going to thrive, right? And so hopefully what we're going to see is more and more people on the right demanding leaders like DeSantis take action to protect them from what is an obviously hostile, federal government that is just shoving failed policies, that is just on its face very bad at what it does, right? They're going to look for alternatives. And that's where the opportunity, I think, lies. And I think that's where people can take action. They can strengthen their communities. They can strengthen their ability to be resilient in those situations. I have some friends down in South Africa, right? And they're looking at a very similar situation that's just a couple decades down the road, where the central government just is completely incompetent, can't produce power, can't deliver water. And so the regional communities are the ones that have had to come together and build their own infrastructure, build their own universities, build their own things that just allow them to operate independently and to protect them and make their quality of life better. And I think, I hope we don't get to that point, but if that's the way things are heading, you want to invest in your communities now. You want to make that difference by being involved and plugging in ways that are going to protect you if the federal government can't do its job, which it increasingly obviously cannot.
Mm-hmm. In closing, I'll get some people love when I do this, the book recommendations that you just off the top of your head, things that my listeners love, thinkers like you, and they always, what books does he read? How did he, get influenced by who and whatnot?
Yeah, definitely. So I think Curtis Yarvin is a really good place to start. Like I said, he was kind of my introduction to a lot of this stuff. And the best thing about Yarvin isn't like, while he has lots of great ideas on his own, the best thing about Yarvin is his reading list. He's extremely well read, and he's a gateway to all kinds of thinkers that you didn't really know existed. And so I think that you can start there. He's a little all over the place. It's a blog style, but it's more modern, so you have that going for you. But then I think if you want to reach out to books, I think The Machiavellians is just a core text for understanding by James Burnham what's going on. Also, his book, The Managerial Revolution, is really essential. So those are two I would recommend. I really like Joseph de Maistre. I think Joseph de Maistre is a really important thinker who addresses a lot of political realities that we've kind of forgot about today. So I would recommend, I believe Imperium Press has a collection of his stuff that I think is a really good one to get. I think Bertrand de Juvenal is another one that's really important. He really understands that mechanism of power, that centralization and the dissolving of intermediate institutions, and that's where I draw a lot from him. And then one that's not like the others, I think C.S. Lewis is really important. Particularly his book, The Abolition of Man, is the nonfiction version. And then he kind of wrote a space trilogy, a sci-fi trilogy. And the third book is tangentially connected to the first two, but really is its own. And it's kind of a fictionalization of the principles that he talked to. And that one's called That Hideous Strength. And I think a lot of people talk about, are we in 1984 or are we in Brave New World? Right. No, we're actually in That Hideous Strength. If you want to look at the novel that really predicted where we are as a society, it's a little offbeat, it's a little quirky, but I think that people would really benefit from C.S. Lewis's understanding of what's happened to the human condition, because it's all part of the same thing. And I think they're both relatively short reads and very digestible.
Are there any journalists, current ones, that either on TV, YouTube, I suppose, or even just in print, that you think are extremely valuable? There's a lot of garbage out there. Who can break through some of that in your mind?
Well, I think that it's always valuable to have like these independent voices, right? It's a failure to just latch on to particular publications, even though I think there are ones out there doing great work like I Am 1776, that kind of stuff. But as individual journalists, obviously Chris Rufo is doing yeoman's work right now. Glenn Greenwald, while we disagree on a lot, I had a conversation with Glenn, and we disagreed on a bunch of stuff. But he's a man of principle. Say what you want about him. He really believes. He's one of the few guys on the left who really believed, and that's why he's on the out. But I think he always does great work. Pedro Gonzalez is another guy who chases down a lot of leads that other people aren't working. And a lot of people won't think of it as journalism, but Libs of TikTok is doing better journalism than pretty much anyone else, right? At this point, people are so crazy that the simple aggregation of this stuff is almost speaks, all for itself. You don't have to have a whole lot of deep investigative journalism to just kind of lay bare what's happening there. There are, of course, a lot more people who do good work, but I think those are some people to definitely check out. I'm sure those are people probably everyone's already aware of, but those are the people that come to mind. Yeah, well, those are good ones. And speaking of people that I like, one of them is you. So plug anything you'd like for my audience to read, listen to, and watch. Absolutely. So I've got my YouTube channel, of course, which is the thing that I kind of started to kick things off. So definitely check that out. And my Twitter probably expected to go to where most people know me. So you can follow me there. And then my Substack, I started a few months ago. And the Substack has kind of podcasts and streams and things from me, but it also has articles. And I've also been serializing a book that I'm writing. I'm like halfway done with it. I'm kind of slowly releasing chapters there. So you can check that out. That also helps support me and that kind of thing. But it gives you exclusive access to early access to the book chapters and stuff there. So the Substack is a great place to check as well. Yeah, what you've been writing on, some of the stuff we spoke about today, the total state. Mm-hmm. Auron MacIntyre, thank you so much for being here. Absolutely, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you. It was a great talk.
Thank you guys once again for riding with me this week. I appreciate all of your support. If you find this show of value, you're more than welcome to donate over at patreon.com/counterflow. I always appreciate the donations that you guys give me. And like I always say, and this is a promise, I genuinely mean this, every penny I make over at Patreon goes right back into this show to pay my amazing producers to give you guys this content. So if you'd like to do so, please do. I won't fight you on it. All of my stuff can be found at counterflowpodcast.com. And like the commercial said, if you'd like to donate for me and my little campaign here for city council at large here in Lockhart, Texas, you can do so at misisgop.org/buck. And I appreciate the support you guys have been giving me for this. And it means a lot. You know, I'm throwing my name in the ring, and we'll see how I do. I've never done anything like this, but I'd certainly love to represent the citizens of Lockhart and make it even better than it already is, and make sure it doesn't become something that we don't want it to become. So thank y'all for the support. Thank you for listening to this show. And until next week, I'll see you soon. Take it easy.
You get split in fucking half, but I call the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.